I'm having a great talk with pianist Clipper Erickson. He is in Pennsylvania, somewhere near Trenton, apparently, across the river or something from Trenton, New Jersey. Uh,
Yes,
his
Morrisville,
what is it?
Morrisville, Pennsylvania. It's right across
Morrisville.
from Trenton. I can see Trenton, the State House, from my window.
Wow, that's kind of impressive, and no wonder I have trouble
Maybe.
with it. Morrisville. I mean, well, it's probably a very small, charming, and delicious town, right? Yeah,
Yes, it's
yeah,
lovely. It's very
yeah.
charming.
I've seen pictures of your new house that you're in. Gorgeous. I love that architecture and that style of homes that were built in the right way back in the whatever
Yeah,
30s or 40s
24,
maybe. 19,
1924.
1924. God,
Yeah.
wonderful. Well, anyway, everybody, I'm talking to Clipper Erickson. He is on the faculty of Westminster Conservatory in Princeton, Temple University, Rutgers University. Have I forgotten anything?
No,
Good.
that's that's enough jobs for me.
Okay, and we're going to chat about his new two CD set. It is called Tableau, Tempest, and Tango. I love that.
Good.
How many hours did it take you to come up with that one? It's a beauty.
Well, it just took a little bit of free thinking and cogitating. I don't think it was hours. And well, it just followed the genesis of the CD, which we'll talk about.
We will talk about it, and we are looking at music by two of your mentors, David Finko. We'll discuss David. Three piano sonatas, a Fantasia on a Russian theme. Richard Broadhead, another mentor of yours, his piano sonata number two, Sonata Nocturna, and then Una Carta de Buenos Aires. Ooh, I'm getting better. Tango Sonatina. And then there's just this third guy. We've talked about this before, but this third guy on the double
Unknown
CD,
composer.
unknown composer, Modest Mussorgsky. Oh, a simple little piece called "Pictures at an Exhibition." That is this two CD set, and it's a beauty, beautifully recorded. Engineering is fabulous. The sound is terrific, and let's just get an idea about how and why you structured this 2 CD set. I know you were paying homage to both of your wonderful mentors, David Finko, whom we'll speak about a little later, and Richard Broadhead. But tell us, it's kind of amusing about putting CDs together.
Well, I had decided for quite some time, even while I was working on my previous project, the Nathaniel Dett project, that I would record all of David Finko's piano music. I had promised him that when I was doing research on Dett. I traveled up to Niagara Falls, and he lives close to Niagara Falls in Fredonia. Niagara Falls is Dett's birthplace, so all his papers were there. And I promised David I would put all of his piano music down on CD because no one had recorded any of it before. And also, Richard Broadhead's a dear friend of mine from Temple University's composer emeritus, and he had written me this delightful tango back in 2011. So I had promised him that I would record that and put it together with Finko's pieces. So I march up to Boston to the recording studios last October. I picked this wonderful piano at the recording studio that Navona has. And after the recording's done, it adds up to 81 minutes, which is about 3 or 4 minutes too long to fit on a disc. So, so what to do? We of course it's going to have to go on 2 discs, but it's really not nice to offer 2 discs with 40 minutes of music on each of them. So I decided, well, there needs to be something else. And I had been playing pictures at an exhibition in concerts quite regularly over the last 2 or 3 years, and I was just warming up using it on the piano and lusting after this magnificent sonority that this instrument was producing, and said, I really would love to play pictures on this piano. So there it was.
By
And
the
so
way, Pictures has been in your head, in your mind since how? Since what? Since pre-puberty
well,
or something?
Well, actually, literally, yeah. I mean, I played through movements of pictures at an exhibition at a child before I could really play them. I was just in love with the music so
Yeah.
much. And then in later life, I started playing it in concerts quite regularly. And it just presented itself as a perfect fit to the other two because most of the music that Broadhead and Finko write are based on images in some way and narrative, and so is Pictures at an Exhibition. So it just kind of fit. And I believe in serendipity in these sorts of things. So it just sort of fit. And I had known that David's music is very tempestuous. and his personality is and his life is very tempestuous. So Tempest was that part, and then of course Broadhead's Tango presented that, and so then I need another T to go with that, and then okay, well, what's the perfect word for images? And so tableau is it. So that's the way it all happened.
Yeah, and you beat me out of that. My next question, which is that, of course, there is some semblance, some real reasoning behind this two CD set, which is about narrative, about descriptive imagery. All three of these composers have it. So, in a beautiful way, you present Finko, you present Broadhead, and then you kind of solidify the whole concept with pictures at an exhibition. And by the way, that performance of pictures. Let's kind of get pictures out of the way because I want to concentrate really on David Finko and
Okay.
also, excuse me, both of them, David Finko and Richard Broadhead. Sorry,
Yes. Yes.
uh, but just to get pictures out of the way a little bit. I hate to sound so dismissive of such a major, incredible work of art, but your performance. I think we talked about this. I love the way you are such an intuitive player in that. You'd think you have heard pictures
A million times
a million times, and as and
with
as
piano and orchestra and many
everything.
different orchestrations, not even by the same
That's
person.
right. Yeah, the Ashkenazi orchestration, and also I wondered. This is undoubtedly Mussorgsky's original piano.
Oh yes, of
Yeah,
course.
of course.
That's the original version of it.
Yeah. Okay. But the idea is that with great masterpieces, there's always something to discover and to find. And I love the way you have, caused me to sort of perk up and pay attention to certain things. And it's about how you approach phrasing. It's about how you see the curvature of a melody. Everybody sees these things generally, but some can get a little bit deeper and a little bit past that. So I congratulate you on a
Well,
really quite
thank you. That's
amazing.
a lot. It's a big risk, of course, putting out a recording, yet another recording of this with all the great performances that there are on disc. So it's necessary to find something that's a little bit personal, a little bit different, a different angle, if you will, to this piece. And I think there are many, many angles that you can approach this piece. And I talk a little bit about that in the description, about the narrative, the images, and the incredible originality of the piece. It took a long time, really, after it was written. People didn't understand it. It took decades for people to really understand what a great piece it was.
Also, speaking of serendipity, the serendipity of your select, your choose, it almost sounded offhanded a little earlier that we got to fill some space. Let's do Mussorgsky, but it's very, very interesting. We've had this talk also about certain connections, and we're about to talk about the Naval Institute,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Soviet and Imperial. And as most people may know, Modest Mussorgsky was an officer in the Imperial Navy. In a sense, an amateur composer. Hate to use that word, but I think
Well, that's
let you
right.
keep
Yeah.
that.
Amateur in the best sense of the word.
And David Finko, as you know, and I want you to tell this story, had a very interesting life in Soviet Russia. Go.
Okay. His father was one of the top engineers designing submarines for the Soviet Navy in the 1950s and 1960s. And that was a huge effort on their part because they had to keep up with us. And the son, David, was groomed to follow in his father's footsteps. So he trained at the Naval Engineering Academy, but he also had a great love for music and started to get very interested in composing and decided to apply to the Leningrad Conservatory, which initially refused him, but eventually they let him in. And they threatened him and made his life very difficult, that if he didn't study harder, that they would kick him out. And so finally, in a fit of desperation, he wrote his first sonata, and then they gave him the first prize.
Which is, by the way, which is on this CD.
Yes.
And it also reminds me of Shostakovich. It's a little bit different, but Shostakovich, first prize, first symphony,
Yeah,
at age
right.
19, something like
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yeah, and David was a little bit older than that, but it's like number ones, great number ones.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about David Finkel's music that's on this CD. Why don't you run us through it? We have the three piano sonatas, and also a little bit, a little overview of his feeling about life in the Soviet Union. He came to the United States. He has his citizenship, so he is Russian American,
Right.
and had a career at Yale and other wonderful places. I guess principally
Penn.
Yale.
Yeah, he was also at Penn
At,
and at one of the universities in Texas. But now he lives in Fredonia, New York, and his works really span a huge lifespan. This first sonata, written in 1964, was inspired by the Yiddish theater of Soviet director Solomon Mikoils, who also had a very remarkable life and work. He translated Shakespeare, specifically King Lear, into Yiddish. And this production of King Lear is his most famous work. And David watched a video of this, which you can find on
yeah,
YouTube if you go and
I
look
watched.
for King Lear. It's really quite amazing. It's very strange, of course, but then very compelling once you start watching it. And he was so moved by this that he used this as the basis for his first piano sonata. And so there's much reference to Yiddish culture, and David, of course, is Jewish, and he also is an expert on Jewish history and Yiddish culture. So that's a big influence on that sonata. The second sonata was written well after.
Let me just interrupt for a
Yes,
moment because I think it's very important that we understand the fate of Solomon Mikoils.
right. He was one of the top directors in the Soviet Union in the 20s and the 30s, and actually he was supposedly, according to David, anyways, much beloved by Stalin.
Hmm.
And he was the head of the anti-fascist committee during the Second World War. After the war, however, he started getting close to American Jewish groups, and then Stalin had him killed in 1948.
And
His body
you
run
described
over.
this. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
Sorry.
his body was run over to make it look like a traffic accident in 1948. Only took 3 years for him to fall on the other side. So he was assassinated.
Interesting how things have not changed there, even as we speak. The
Well, yeah,
assassination of political figures and
sure. It's so long.
journalists and all the rest. Okay, so the first sonata is dedicated to Solomon McOils, and is a it's dark, of course. It's a dark
Yeah,
piece.
it's
Tell me a
a
little bit about it, and then let's move on to the
the
second sonata.
third movement is really the center point. David's slow movements are really the center of his pieces, certainly in the first and the second sonata. The third movement, he what came to him when he was hiking in Lithuania in some beautiful hills. It was one of his favorite places to go. And he later found out from villagers that there are mass graves of
Uh,
Holocaust victims underneath the hills.
ah,
So
ah,
you hear this peace, very peaceful, meditative section with these little wisps of melancholy melody, and it's interrupted with this tremendous horror, like a nightmare. And these two things fight through the movement. It's a remarkable piece.
Now, the second sonata I happen to enjoy very, very much. Tell me why.
Well, it has a narrative. The first movement is, in his words, a paroxysm of a mental disorder. So it's a very violent, but also very expressive and plaintive movement. The second movement is a chorale.
And gorgeous. Tell us about it.
It's a to my mind, it really it evokes Russian Orthodox music very strongly. It almost sounds a bit like Tchaikovsky in places, I think. But his idea was that it's what happens to you after the KGB takes you to the mental institution or political crimes or whatever, and then gives you a shot that like pretty much destroys your brain, and you're left like
Yeah.
this, and so it's just you in this psychic swoon, as he puts it. The third movement is a toccata, and with a lot of irony. So it's the soul's struggle against this totalitarian society, and the fourth movement is recapitulates movements, things heard in other movements, and ends with a triumphant version of this chorale that you hear in the second. So it's almost a romantic piece in its conception, even though the language is 20th century. So that's probably what took you.
And the number two sonata was written a little later. Was he out of the Soviet Union by then?
Yes, well,
1998.
1998. He came
Yeah,
over in 1979 when many refuseniks were coming here.
yeah. How about number three? Because it's in one movement, which is interesting
Number
because it's
three is
preceding
shorter,
number
much
four.
more terse. He wrote it for me in 2009. It's monothematic, but with great variety. And I think it's an extremely compelling piece. But it shows a much more condensed language. He's also written a fourth sonata just earlier this year that I'm going to premiere that is similar in vein. It's much more condensed. There's much more compression of the musical narrative. And I find that often people in their older age write these sorts of things.
Huh, that's a very interesting idea and insight. Did these two composers know each other because they were close enough in terms of locale in the States
Yeah,
when they were both here in the States?
they both were aware of each other in Philadelphia because David lived in the Philadelphia area for many years, and so I'm sure that they knew of each other's work quite
Because
strongly.
they match very well on this CD, the two composers. I think
Yeah, in a
they're
way,
you know.
they do. Especially the Sonata Notturno of
Yeah.
Broadhead. It's again a dark stream of consciousness kind of piece. Alternates between frightening images, peaceful, almost religious images. I find that to be a real joy to play, and his ability to get sounds and textures out of the piano is very pronounced.
Let's
The
talk about.
tango
Oh, sorry.
The tango is more of a playful piece. It's almost kind of a little bit of a joke on a tango. It has kind of the walking jagged bass lines that tangos have, except they don't have the same kind of rhythm. He writes tangos in 5/8 and 3/8 and that sort of thing. And all of the minor third inflections in the melodic material in the right hand. But there's also a lot of impressionistic music in this
Yeah.
piece.
It's a tough one, really. I think very subtle, very obscure, obscurantist in the
Yeah,
sense
it's very subtle.
you walk into it. It's called Una Carta de Buenos Aires, Tango
Yeah. So it's
Sonatina.
more of an impression rather than a
Yeah.
tango that you would dance to.
And have I jumped the gun here a little bit? There's somewhere where your initials are in one of these sonatas. Which one is that? Is it?
In the Sonata Notturno, he has picked the
Ah,
musical notes out of my name. If at the beginning it's C E and C E flat, E flat of course is S. So you have C E and C S, which are letters of my name, which are sort of in there as a little signature that nobody necessarily needs to know, other than I'm telling you.
uh-huh. Thank you. Also very nice, quite complimentary, and just a wonderful thing. Composers keep secrets and wonder whether
They do,
humankind will ever discover them. That's what I've
yeah.
discovered about living composers. There's all kinds of stuff in their work that they just sit back and they never tell anyone anything about it. They just sort of wonder if anybody might be able to figure some of
And
these things out.
whether anybody's going to pick that out. Yeah, it's like a little signature.
Now let's talk about pictures for a moment because pictures at an exhibition does occupy the greater part of the second CD. It couldn't have
Yeah,
been, despite your playing it all this time. It's a great monster to prepare, I'm sure, let alone prepare it so that it's flawless, which it has to be
yeah,
for a
yeah.
recording.
It's a
What
tough one.
what was that process about and how'd it go?
Preparing the music. Well, I played it back in 2000, 2001 and put it away, which I like to do for great works. You play it once and it's in one place, and then you live a little bit, and then you take it out, and then it's in another place.
Yeah, exactly
And
right.
yeah,
And
and
it changes and grows on you over time as you grow in maturity
very
and intellectual.
yeah, you see it in new ways as you have more life experience. That's very true.
Yeah, with all music, particularly. Anything that might stand out in pictures that you once upon a time performed in a certain manner and you have found some little revelation? I know I'm putting you on the spot. I'm
Um,
thinking of the chicks. We talked about the dance of the chicks a
Chicks,
little bit
yeah,
earlier.
okay. Well, I take the chicks very light and quick, and it's for me, it's almost kind of an impressionistic piece because it's so ridiculous. These chickens acting and dancing, it's sort of like a dream sequence. And the one thing that's remarkable about this piece is his use of piano texture, but it's a very unconventional use of piano texture because he relies on things like registers, bare octaves, rather than the nice, filled out, beautiful, mellifluous textures of, say, Rachmaninoff and Scriabin. He's expressing the common man in this.
Oh, well
He's
put.
not. It's not. It's not beautiful on purpose because he's talking about everyday people and their struggles and their sufferings.
Also, I like the way you handled Great Gate at Kiev, which just about everybody knows, and some tend to be rather bombastic. Some interpretations, all that is a huge, massive piece. But I love the clarity of how all 10 of your fingers
Well,
illuminate
this, of
that
course,
opening.
is bells. It's all about bells, and my wife does hand
Ah,
bells, so I'm around bells a great deal. And so I kind of understand how bells work. And this is probably the one piece that really works on the piano the best. The orchestra can't quite do bells like the piano does.
huh, interesting. Very, very nice. And let's see, so I think we've pretty much covered everything. What on earth is coming up next? You mentioned a fourth or a new sonata
Yeah,
for
it's
you,
another Finko
Finko
sonata, and I
sonata.
think he's also writing some short pieces. He keeps
Uh-huh.
bouncing titles
He has to fill
off
out a
me.
CD for you, right? Will this be an all
No.
Finko CD? Do you think? Nah. Okay.
Well, if he keeps going, I keep pushing him and see how much I can
Hmm.
get out of him. He's 82, so we'll see how much
Um,
creativity he has, but he still has a lot of writing in him, I think, so you never know.
so in the
Um,
Go ahead.
so my next project besides that is to premiere the 10th sonata of Laurie Altman, whom you know. I think
Yes.
you've listened to some of his
Yeah.
pieces.
I
He's
think I
a
owe you a review for an earlier CD even. I
Oh
believe.
yeah, you'll love this sonata number
I love
7.
his music, by the way. Thank you for sending his two sonatas. It was 5 and 7, wasn't it? The two
Yeah,
sonatas.
5
You,
was back in a few years ago, and 7 was 2 years ago, and now I'm on to number 10 at his request. It's his latest sonata, and it's titled Aleppo. So this is
mm.
going to be a very serious venture for me to interpret this piece because it is so multifaceted and so tragic and deep. It quotes the Mozart Requiem.
And let's remind everybody, Aleppo is the Syrian city that has been literally obliterated from the earth as a
Right.
result of this
And
horrible civil war,
it's
just
happening
utterly
again.
destroyed. Yeah, it is
It's
happening.
about to happen again in yet another city.
Yeah, that's right. Near Damascus, the Assad is determined to wipe out every iota of a
Every city,
resistance to Israel.
basically. So it's the tragedy of this and the helplessness. I think a lot of that piece is very personal on his part. Is like you watch this and in horror, and what can you do? So it's a feeling of almost of frustration and anger in the piece.
Except express, of course, this horror
Other
in
than to
art.
say that we won't forget.
Yeah, something
So that's what I think. That's what the piece.
powerful.
Yeah.
That's
So
that's
it's
the
a,
beauty of art, the power of it.
yeah.
That is
It's
so understood by so many people. But art is extremely powerful, and
Well, it's
this
very powerful, and artists are sensitive people, so they know what's going on, and that affects their music. And as it does, as has with David, and has with Richard. I mean, there are people, they don't live in a vacuum,
yeah,
so they're
exactly right.
affected by things, and it has an effect on their music.
I feel very strongly that another kind of misunderstanding is that composers somehow bury themselves in a back corner of dark room and just compose their own little internal stuff. No, no, no. They're very observant. They know what's
That's
going on in the
not
world and they
true.
speak to it. Yeah. Well, I think we've just about done it, believe it or not. And the Navano, no, excuse me, Navona, excuse me, Navona,
Navona.
Navona is the CD label. It's a two CD set, Tableau, Tempest, and Tango. We've just discussed works of David Finko and Richard Broadhead, and then as an afterthought, the not really, of course, but
No,
just as
not
an
as
extra
at
treat.
all.
How about an
It was
extra
just a
treat?
joy to go back there and play
Yeah,
pictures on that piano.
pictures. Beautiful, beautiful recording. But what an amazing set! You have two contemporary works, very imaginative, very descriptive, very narrative, and then the sort of master of all narrative descriptive works, pictures
Yeah,
at an
and it
exhibition.
also pulls together music from the past with music of today.
Yeah,
That
exactly right. Yeah.
there's a connection there. It's not that something is like fundamentally different about what composers do than they did in Mussorgsky's time. So it's a connection
Also,
across time.
Also, I want to point out because, as you know, I'll be reviewing this CD and others. My cup runneth over is up at my website performingartsreview.net, and as well as another interview with you. And the bottom line really is that artists who put CDs together, it's not you just don't grab. It's not a grab bag. It's a tremendous intellectual process to conclude what you want, how you want it, how you want the CD to work, to speak, how you want that 60 or more minutes to speak to a public consciousness.
Yeah,
So
there's a lot more to go into it than just sit down and play something.
yeah, let alone
You,
raising money for it. All the fundraising that's involved and research and finding the scores. Even in this case, making all of those decisions. So it's quite an effort for people to
well, it's an
create
effort,
these things.
and it's about leaving a legacy and
Yeah,
putting something
absolutely.
out there that matters. Like you're
Yeah,
adding something to the musical conversation.
yeah, absolutely. Well, pianist Clipper Erickson, I think we have done this interview. You'll be delighted to hear, since we had a couple false starts yesterday. Uh, uh, I'm looking forward to putting this review up. I suppose I might perhaps hear from you at some point in the future for a little bit more to review of your work. But I think we've mentioned I need to mention it just that this is not like your first or second CD. You've been doing CDs for a million years. It seems like. I
Not a
mean,
million, probably
cranking them out.
about 20.
About 20 years.
Yeah.
And as we spoke yesterday, the idea is that finally something happens and people start paying attention. And for sure, it was the Nathaniel Dett 2 CD set that
That
just kind of,
was He's a big part of my life in many
yeah.
ways. I
So,
have concerts playing Dett in Toronto with the Nathaniel Dett Chorale, and we have a lot of Dett things going on at Westminster, including a big festival in February. So people are really interested in the music, and it's a great thing to bring this out because I knew it was great, and I hoped that but people didn't know it. So I never know whether just because I think it's great doesn't mean that everybody else is going to think it's great. So it's very heartening for me to see the success of it.
that was huge. It really was huge. You discovered for all of us a composer of great importance who had slipped away from us.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, he's not slipped away anymore.
That is for sure.
Yeah.
Clipper Erickson, many, many thanks indeed for this
Thank you,
interview.
Dan.
And we'll see you again. I
Yes,
hope sometime.
of course.
Okay. Bye.
Anytime.
See you.